Hello and welcome to Kumza Africa Amplified, reverberating across Africa and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I'm joined by Kingsley Mamabolo, a distinguished diplomat who has played a significant role when it comes to peacemaking processes here on the African continent. He joins me exclusively as we talk about his incredible journey. If you like the content of this podcast, remember to subscribe, like, and share. Welcome. All right, Ambassador Kingsley Mamabolo, it is a pleasure to have you on this platform. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to your listeners.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on this platform, Ambassador. I'm looking forward to our conversation because there is so much to talk about, isn't it, Ambassador? We are going to be talking about the memoir that you have recently launched, which talks about your incredible journey. But before we talk about your memoir, Ambassador, I just want to take the discussion back way back to the early years of your activism. The year is 1976, Ambassador. At the height of apartheid, things were turbulent at the times, but you decided to join the armed struggle. Talk to me about what was going through your mind when you made a decision to join the armed struggle in 1976.
Well, first, let me say, those were difficult times. We were not sure what to do. We were student activists. It was 1976 uprising. You would know names like Tet Machinini and the others. These were our counterparts. I was at Naledi High School at the time. And there were lots of debates. Many people were leaving the country. The ANC was recruiting people who were presumably in trouble to join the ranks outside. Some of us were not decided. We thought, well, if people all leave, who's going to pursue the struggle here? So we've got to remain here and wage the struggle. But when we then became targets of the regime itself, well, they were now arresting. And those who were arrested before us were then informed that, look, we saw your name and so on. And there was a lot of confusion. There were rumors circulating, whether they were true or right or wrong, that people were being killed in prisons and so on. And so when we became targets ourselves, some of us then decided maybe it is time to leave. And of course, there were operatives of the ANC at hand to help us leave the country. And that's how I left the country. I wasn't that much political at that time, except for student activities that I was engaged in. And of course, that was the time of Black consciousness also. So we were a little apart from the politics of the ANC, for example, that talked about South Africa belonging to all who live in it, black and white. We couldn't understand those politics. For us, what we saw at the time were whites oppressing black, and couldn't understand why Africans wanted to be so understanding. So that was the environment in which we were living. Many people were being killed. The uprisings was in full force. Houses were being burned. Cars were being damaged by the students. You actually had a conflict between the police and the students, and subsequently the entire community as a whole.
Mm-hmm. As you say, Ambassador, those were turbulent times. It was not easy for you to even imagine having to cross the country to join the armed struggle and join your comrades. But you had to also contend with the fact that, you had to survive without your family outside of the country. How did that experience shape you?
Well, we were forced, some of us, to go into exile. And it was, as I say in my memoir, a journey to the unknown. You had to create new families, meet new people. You didn't know where you were going. I remember I took the bold step of informing my parents. Many students didn't, for fear that they would implicate their families and people would just leave. But I thought with all the mystery and things happening that were inexplicable, people disappearing, let them know I'm going. Because, at that time, some people got killed in prison. So you didn't know whether they crossed the border or they died or they actually reached exile. So I went and spoke to my mom. I'm leaving. Oh, of course, as a parent, she was greatly concerned. My child, no, don't, and so on. And I told her, Mom, you have a choice. Either you have your child living somewhere, even if you don't know where they are, or you have them here with the possibility that they could be captured and killed. We don't know what the consequences are. My mom convened a family meeting, and my siblings agreed with me, Mom, let him go, let him go. We're not too sure what's going to happen. And of course, we were received outside by the ANC in that confusion. As I say, you are meeting strangers, you are uprooted, you're feeling very vulnerable. But we had, I remember the first leader I came into contact with was Ndaten Kadimen, who was in Swaziland, who then started teaching us politics. And as I say, we couldn't understand some of the politics, particularly this clause of the ANC that talked about South Africa belonging to blacks and whites. And we debated that extensively. Not so much with him, we would listen to him, but after that we would meet ourselves as groups and go engage. They didn't confine us, they didn't restrict us. So we were able to move about in the town, in the city there, and meet other students who were not even the ANC, some of our friends, and debate this. We came to the conclusion that no, look, the ANC appear organized. Why don't we take advantage, go with them, get trained, and once they give you a gun, of course, you go back. They will not be there to tell you who to shoot. They will not be able to dictate once you are inside there. Then you can do what you want. What I'm trying to explain is you had a situation where the situation inside the country was in itself turning us into some form of racism, and we were not aware of it ourselves. Um, we were just reacting to that situation. So the ANC, of course, green as we were, had to take measures to make sure that they turn around us from that kind of thinking. Because indeed, what we're not fighting, and we now understand that, it was not whites as a color, but whites buttressing that system of oppression.
Mhm. But you were barely in your 20s, isn't it, Ambassador?
I had just turned 21 years.
I can imagine the anxiety of having to cross the borders and joining your comrades. But I'm interested to know, in terms of the reconciliation of your Christian background, your Christian upbringing, and here you are facing the reality of picking up arms. How did you make that reconciliation?
Well, let me start by saying we had a choice. The ANC gave us a choice. Do you want to go to school? Do you want to go for military training? And some opted to go to school. We felt that was cowardice. Who's going to fight if we all go to school? And we actually we were mocking the ones who had taken a decision to go to school. And so indeed we did go to training in Angola. I went also to the German Democratic Republic for training. And as we were training, the irony of all this, as you're saying, hit us very hard. Here we are, some of us with this Christian upbringing that you're mentioning there, where you were taught to have the godly fear of taking life. And here we were actively participating in activities that were teaching us to prepare for that eventuality where we would indeed take life if it needed to be. And so, of course, along with that is the politics of understanding that, look, because of the cost, the justice cause that you're fighting, you have a right to take arms. You begin to have an understanding that for freedom and justice, nothing can stand in the way. And if it means you have to train, if it means you have to get ready to kill, or if it means you have to pay the ultimate sacrifice yourself, then you should be ready to do so. And within that, we began to learn liberation theology, and we understood that in some areas, people who believed in God did not condemn and struggle because they saw it as a necessity. And then we of course, came to understand that indeed even Jesus Christ, in those circumstances we're facing, would have understood that we needed to take up arms to rid South Africa and the world of this evil injustice that was occurring in our country.
You needed to take up arms, but as you say, Ambassador, you were also mocking your fellow comrades who were going to school at the time. But at what point do you then decide to pursue education during your years in exile?
Well, first we thought we are not going to, we met people who had left in the 60s there. They called them Umgwenya. And those are wildly people have been out here for a very long time. We're not going to stay that long. We thought we're just coming in 2-3 years and we'll be back inside the country and the country will be liberated. Guess what? What happened is some of us took almost 20 years ourselves outside. And then, of course, there you had all the other opportunity to realize that this struggle is not going to be overnight. We are fighting a formidable enemy that was very strong, that possessed even nuclear weapons at that time. In the African continent, I think the strongest at the time. And that's why they could harass others who dared to support us. And in the process, having trained militarily, and some of us did not have the opportunity to be sent back inside the country, we had opportunity to then pursue studies and study wherever we could get a chance, whilst at the same time working and doing activities of the ANC internationally outside the country.
Mhm. And what a journey it has been, Ambassador, because we are talking to you now as one of the distinguished top diplomats and somebody who has actively been involved in peacemaking processes here on the African continent. What is it, do you think, that distinguishes you from other diplomats, Ambassador?
Well, we learned diplomacy first on the ground. When I was sent to Tanzania in 1978 by the national executive of the ANC, I didn't even know what it is I'm supposed to do. They said, you're going to be the deputy representative. We had a big community of exiled South Africans. And that was the beginning of my diplomatic work. And so I had to learn from the Umgwenya that I spoke about, the colleagues who were doing this work before us. And so attached to them, as I say, quite not understanding what it all was. So over the years, you learn. So it's not something that you just learned at school in the classroom. It was practical. You had to explain the justice of the cause that you are fighting, the need for support, because indeed things were happening in South Africa. People were being killed, people were being arrested, and apartheid was not going anywhere. Increasingly, you had others as we embarked on this diplomatic work, which otherwise should be easy if we were just to tell people who are freedom loving and people who respect human rights. It shouldn't be a problem, but unfortunately, it wasn't so. You had most of the Western countries, their governments then, supporting apartheid regime. So it wasn't that easy. You had to wage a struggle to persuade people that this is an evil regime, that we all need to come together to fight this. Some of them called us terrorists. They took advantage of the fact that we had appealed to the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries and said, oh, now we are communists and all that. And yet we were very clear that apartheid is a violation of human rights and should not be conscribed into this isms, whether it's capitalism. Anybody who loves human rights and justice should fight whatever they may believe in, whatever socio-economic system they believe in. Let me tell you, the people in the Western world believed us, and many of them defied their government. For example, we had the biggest anti-apartheid movement in the UK. You had the Americans who, people in their various formations supported us unconditionally, and we enjoyed that support. The Scandinavian countries. So despite the governments, some of them, embracing the apartheid regime and refusing to support us, their people on the ground did not go along with them and ensured that we received the support that we required.
Talking about the UK, Ambassador, we're going to be talking about the UK-South Africa relations in just a moment. But before you took up the High Commissioner's post in London, Ambassador, you were the head of the Joint African Union, United Nations Hybrid Operation UNAMID in Darfur, Western Sudan, to maintain peace in the region. When you look at the instability still facing Sudan at the moment, what comes to mind?
I regret that peace in Africa has not achieved what we intended it to. I've had, as you say, quite a journey dealing with peace, mediation, negotiations, conflict resolution in Africa, which is the opportunity that was given to me by the government, and I'm quite happy that I had that privilege. I served at the headquarters of the African Union as ambassador there at the time of the formation of the AU, and when the Africans were coming up with policies that say we should make sure that the continent is not left behind, that the globalization that we've had has been really at the expense of Africa. What do we do? Come up with new policies, and hence the new organization, the African Union that was formed, with its policies, such as the NEPAD, the peer review mechanism, you had the formation of the African Court, the African Parliament, and many such institutions which were meant to contribute and make sure that Africa is at the same footing with other continents, that it is not left behind as we are moved forward with the quest to integrate politically and economically, that we do ensure that Africa does benefit. Unfortunately, in the area of peace, there has been some achievement, but as you can see in the Sudan, there's still quite a lot to be done. It's not only Sudan. Conflicts are there in the Sahel region, in Western Africa, and in some other places. And so those conflicts continue to pull us back. The conflict in Sudan accounts for more than 30 million who are in serious trouble in that country. Many people are dying, you have refugees, you have displaced people, and it is a hindrance. It is stopping us from ensuring that we can move forward with confidence towards development of the continent.
You spoke about the regrets that you have in terms of how the operation turned out in Darfur. What would you say is the key legacy of UNAMID, Ambassador?
UNAMID played a great role. I recall that it came to Sudan at a time when there were accusations of genocide, that the Bashir regime is committing genocide, and the international community had to intervene. So this was the intervention of the international community. There were many others who preceded me who headed that. that institution, that organization, UNAMID, which, by the way, was a hybrid mission of the United Nations and the African Union. And so from 2007 to 2021, maybe beginning, when I left and we closed the mission, UNAMID had played a role to avert what would have been even much more bigger disaster than we had in Sudan. In fact, when I closed the mission, the people on the ground were unhappy. They were saying, we still have these problems, and the United Nations is pulling out this institution. That has been the institution that has managed to keep the peace to some extent. Not completely, because the war continued. Here and there, we achieved some victories in the negotiations we had between the government of Sudan and the movements that were fighting that government. But the presence of UNAMID itself, because what you had were contingents from African countries mostly, from the Gambia, from Nigeria. When I was there, we had about 16,000 troops from Africa and some from Europe. You had particularly the police force and some other forces like that. But the bulk of the armed forces that were there were African forces, which were meant to intervene. And occasionally they did. They had a lot of restrictions also in terms of how they intervened, because, we were pursuing a United Nations resolution that could limit us. We were therefore not in combat with the forces of Sudan. We were not meant to do that. But sometimes we had those kind of limitations that we couldn't exercise what we wanted to do to the fullest because we had to cooperate with the government of Sudan. But by and large, in answer to your question, yes, indeed, UNAMID played a big role, because I think we could have been talking a disaster. In fact, the escalation of the struggle in Sudan, let's face it, comes after UNAMID has left.
Mhm. Do you still believe that dialogue is the solution to solve the problems in Sudan, not only in Sudan, but in other parts of the continent that are still facing conflicts?
Yes, Coombs, because I can tell you that question of yours is very relevant today, nowadays. And I have been a mediator and a negotiator for a long time. Our believer has always been, you negotiate and persuade people to accept. And that way you have an everlasting peace. But as you can see, things have turned around today. We bomb you and then force you to accept the terms and what you call for peace. That kind of peace doesn't last. But unfortunately, that's what we have at this point in time. But I don't think we should abandon what we believe in mediation and conflict resolution because of this deviation that we seem to appear globally, that it is still important to resort to what we understand about conflict resolution, about peace and peaceful resolution of conflict.
Mm. Was your role, Ambassador, in Sudan, would you say that was a defining moment for you in terms of the peacekeeping roles that you have played here on the continent?
It was a huge responsibility. As I said, I was now in charge of about 15,000 or so men and women. And every life was in your hand in the decisions that you take and make. And there were tense moments. Like, for example, when, because of poverty, the Sudanese decided to raid some of our camps and loot. That was a tense moment because we were armed. We couldn't allow a situation where people just move in and take whatever. And some of these people sometimes came with machetes. And so the lives of the people in the camp was in danger. What do you do? These people who are coming here, most of them would come in the midst of women and children. And so you can't just open fire at the people approaching to you and be seen tomorrow as having killed or committed that kind of genocide against men and women and children. But you had to do something also to safeguard your people. So for me, it was a huge responsibility in which I learned very quickly. It was a leapfrogging in the kind of career that I was pursuing, which was the negotiation in many other places. I had been in Burundi, in the Congo, in Sierra Leone, and so on. This was different, and it needed cool heads and cool reflection.
Talking about your role in Burundi and the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ambassador, the Great Lakes region, it's one of the regions where you served as the special envoy for peace. What do you make of the peace agreement that has been signed between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo in an effort to bring long-lasting peace in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo?
Well, look, we have been working for peace, so any attempts to resolve that conflict, and if it goes in that direction, brings hope. So we, whichever way it has been achieved, we can't be in a hurry to condemn. We can only hope that this lays the foundation, the platform for Rwanda and the DRC to take advantage of the space that has been created by President Donald Trump in America, and utilize it to move to the fullest extent of the peace. As I said, I don't believe that you can force down the throats a peaceful solution on people. But if they have agreed to conditions, as they seem to have, we wish them luck. We applaud the step that they have taken, and let them take, because that would not end there if it is not a peace that has considered other elements that needs to be taken into account. But as a platform has been created, the first step has been taken, where perhaps they will lay down their arms, and we can only hope that they will follow through and make sure that it's a lasting peace, that we don't have a situation where they slide back into conflict.
Mhm. What do you say to those ambassadors who say that, who are actually not impressed that the agreement was signed outside of the continent?
Well, it doesn't matter where agreements are signed. Of course, we hold the view that the Africans must lead in negotiations. But if it happens somewhere, I mean, even in Sudan, there were some certain occasions where we went to Germany and where we went to Qatar, wherever we could find a way to try and break the deadlock. And if you have, if the Americans have, then we should applaud them for that. So it doesn't really matter whether peace is signed, as long as we have peace. What is important in all situations, we always insist, is that the Africans must not be left behind. They must not sit back themselves. They must make sure that the African Union and the African continent gets involved and somehow leads in the processes. Because it is only by leading in our own situation that we can ensure lasting peace.
Mhm. What do you think should be done, Ambassador, to make sure that the conflicts in Sudan and, of course, the one in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, that the world does not turn a blind eye to these conflicts as we have seen with the conflict in Sudan?
We regret that. We regret that the people of Sudan seem to be forgotten. Other conflicts which are emerging are taking a priority. But it doesn't mean the people there are suffering less than wherever the other conflicts are. We believe that the conflict of Sudan will truly have a lasting peace if it involves the civilians on the ground. At the moment, what you are having are military men who are fighting amongst themselves for power. And what you do need is to make sure that the civilians, the people, are involved. In fact, if I recall, during the time we were there, Sudan was on the right track. It was in a transitional period in which the civilians were involved, in which people were talking about an interim period where they can look at the transitional period to look at the transformation of many things, the justice and legal system, prepare for a vote, a one man, one vote, in which the people can participate, preparation to draw up a new constitution that would pave the way for a democratic Sudan, ensure that we don't keep sliding into the conflicts that we're having here. So they were on the right track. And that process was hijacked by the military. In a sense, the military made the coup of a process that they themselves were part of and had agreed with the civilian to move forward with. We think Sudan needs to get back to that kind of situation where the civilian community, civil society, will play a critical role. And again, you are right, we call on the international community to focus the spotlight on the Sudanese problem, on the DRC problem, and other problems in the continent, because we need all this to come to an end. The African Union is committed to getting rid of weapons in the continent, to ending wars forever. Because indeed, for Africa to prosper, for us to get past this poverty and marginalization, we can only do so if there's peace and security in the country.
Talking about power, Ambassador, we are having this important conversation as the influence of the African continent continues to grow globally. You have at one point served as the special envoy, as the ambassador at the United Nations. What do you make of Africa's growing influence when it comes to global geopolitics, Ambassador? What does it mean for the continent?
Africa has itself debated this question. Are we doing enough to leapfrog? Because we have great potential in the country. I don't think there's a debate about whether Africa is indeed developing. I think we are. I think the question could be, is the pace right? And when the African Union was formed in 2000, thereabouts, the new century, these were the debates to say, look, man, all these other centuries we have come from 1963, we spoke about the integration of Africa, both politically and economically. And we put means, we came up with policy formulations that ensures we move in that, but we seem to be moving slow. What is it that we can do to speed up this process? Otherwise, we're going to be bypassed by these revolutions in the world, and we get left behind and cry afterwards, oh, we could have been there, people have taken advantage of us and so on. And with the new century coming, people say, no. And that's why the formation of the AU. This debate, I remember, was held in 1999 in Algiers at the summit of the AU, that you see what we call globalization has really been globalization at the expense of Africans. What is it that we need to do? Now, with these policies, and I can tell you in Africa, we are not running short of policy. We are not running short of intel. If you look at the documentation we have in terms of the formulation of policy, we've come up with great minds and great thinking in putting all this together. The question, I must say, is implementation. We haven't been that great in implementing some of the policies that we ourselves have come up with. And of course, the debate has always been whether we should have had one government, as Colonel Gaddafi was arguing, or Kwame Nkrumah before him. Maybe let us form one government. And you had the Thabo Mbekis and the Olusegun Obasanjo saying, no, it can't be artificial. It's got to be gradual. Let's have a gradual, the regions begin to formulate, integrate nicely, and ultimately we will reach unity at that level of the continent. What is not at dispute is that Africa does need to integrate. We do need to integrate politically and economically. We do need to see the Africa Continental Free Trade Area negotiations that are taking place moving with greater speed, because we should have the power to negotiate as a continent. There's great potential in Africa, our own minerals that we have, the youth population that we have, and everybody says, if we can get our cards right now as Africa, in 2050, Africa would be a force to reckon with, because there's a lot in Africa that's still untapped. We just need to come on board and get our act right ourselves.
When you took up the ambassadorial post in the UK, ambassador, a few years ago, President Ramaphosa paid a visit to the UK, and he was the first head of state to pay the king a visit at the time. What kind of impact did Ramaphosa's visit have when it comes to South Africa, United Kingdom's relations?
Let me just say first, I have been fortunate to have served all the presidents of Democratic South Africa. Nelson Mandela appointed me to be the High Commissioner in Zimbabwe. Thabo Mbeki says, okay, we want you to be our representative in Addis Ababa. And in Nigeria, I was High Commissioner there from Thabo Mbeki. Jacob Zuma says, no, we're sending you to the United Nations to go and represent us here. And then Cyril Ramaphosa decides to send me here to the UK to come. I've been grateful to have played that role and for all of them to have had confidence in me that I could play a role in all those areas. You were talking about the visit of the president. That was great. I had just arrived a couple of months, and the king, as you know, had taken over as the king, and after sadly the passing of his mother. And we felt honored that he could have decided that the very first visit of a head of state from any other country should be from anywhere in the world, could have been President of the United States or the royalty in Japan, but he insisted that it has to be South Africa. And of course, as you can imagine, that catapulted us because people don't say, oh, why this interest in this country? But I think that the demonstration of the extent to which the UK feels invested in South Africa. We're privileged in that sense, that from the royalty, the government here, the business people, the interest in South Africa continues to be great and high. People want to invest in South Africa. We are blessed with a beautiful country. People want to tour South Africa. They continue to see us as the gateway to Africa. So when you talk Africa, their first consideration is South Africa. Even when we have our problems, and sometimes we do have our problems, our own ups and downs, these people are so invested in South Africa that they urge us on. They want to see us succeed. At some stage, you can feel when we're not moving at the speed or the rate at which they want us to, it's like they can shake us and say, hey, can you people wake up, man? We want to and so indeed you have You have great interest in South Africa. That will never die. We're gloating in that kind of relations. Remember, these are historical relations, political, economical, they are social. We have families on both sides of the divide. You have families.
But of course, talking about South Africa's influence and the historical ties between South Africa and the UK ambassador, the stature of South Africa, of the continent, will even be catapulted even more with South Africa poised to host the G20 summit later this year, isn't it, Ambassador?
Of course, definitely. The G20 is a platform, a very powerful platform, in which we have made it clear that we will follow on the footsteps of other developing nations that led, like your Brazil, your India, your Indonesia, and so on. But also we are grateful that we are joined by Africa. Remember, Africa now is a full member of the G20. So it is a powerful platform in which our issues can be taken on board. We have the opportunity to make sure that we can focus on all those areas of debate. The one issue, for example, we're looking at is your critical minerals, which is the focus of the world now today. People are saying, look, critical minerals, we want to go and just grab, and we say we must avoid what happened in the past where people came and just took our minerals without adding any value. This time we must talk about a win-win situation. We must talk about beneficiation. What is it that we get? We must stop this thing that whatever we have gets improved somewhere else, and we buy it even at a greater amount than the raw material that we have sold. So we've put that on the table, on the agenda. There are issues such as the debt issue that the G20 has been dealing with for a long time now, but we need to keep on putting the spotlight on that. The G20, many countries, the debt issue is still a problem. Many countries can't afford financing this borrowing, and that to the extent that they are now unable to look at their own demands, such as health, education, and many other items on the ground, facing them to alleviate poverty in their ground. We need to do something with that. And what better than the platform we have at the G20, where all these countries, rich and poor, are sitting together, and all these countries have the opportunity to influence everybody to make changes in these areas. So we're consulting with the African Union, but rightly so. And so peace and security is one such issue that we need to discuss at length about that, and many other such issues that we need to look into.
Of course, we are looking forward to the upcoming summit. Ambassador, the whole continent will be looking at the summit to see what comes out of that conference. As we wrap up this conversation, Ambassador, talk to me about what you would like to achieve through your autobiography.
Listen, I think the book intends to remind people. Sometimes we forget. We get so engrossed in the problems we have amongst ourselves and even forget where we come from. That the struggle, there was a lot of sacrifice. And people paid the ultimate sacrifice. Some were arrested, some were exiled. Some inside the country were killed in their hundreds. So there was a lot in contribution in terms of making sure, by all people of South Africa, making sure that we win over apartheid. So this book is one such book. It's the memoir about myself, my own journey that I took, but also it's a story about the African continent, because wherever I was, I talk about what was happening in Africa then. For example, in 1978, when I got to Tanzania, there was war between Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, then led by Julius Nyerere, and Idi Amin in Uganda. There was war going on between the two countries. So you talk about those situations and all that discussions we had about the AU, the formulation of. So it's also a book about Africa's future or Africa's prosperity, because we're not only just looking at the past. I'm also just not sitting there in that book and lamenting about my own journey, what could have been, what I have missed in the past, but we're looking in the future. What is it that we want to see change in South Africa, in the continent? What kind of values do we need to continue upholding that we mustn't forget? So it's a book about our past, but it's also a rallying call about the potential we have and the future we can make out of those potentials that we have. And so it's a necessary book, relevant, particularly in this world now that is becoming so difficult, where those values that I was talking about seem to be trashed and trampled on by people, and very little is said to hold those who are doing that accountable. And so really we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to say what is it that we need to do to make sure that South Africa, Africa and the world becomes a better place for people to live in.
Huh. After your ambassadorial role in the United Kingdom, Ambassador, as we wrap up this conversation, do you have any plans to retire? Because it seems like the continent needs you more now.
Yeah, Well, they say never mention the name retire. You change roles. I may not be ambassador, I may not serve in government in future. But as long as I have life in my limbs where I am, you want to continue doing something in whatever way you can to contribute, because retiring means you abandon everything now. You go play golf or sleep half the day. I still think I have energy. And I think for all of us who have accumulated this kind of experience, we all have to sit back and say, how do we bring back all these experiences to bear to make sure that they will contribute and continue to give guidance, even if we are in the background, not in the forefront, maybe not ambassadors or ministers or anything of the sort, but we can still play a role by the input we make with what we have learned.
Ambassador Kingsley Mamabolo, it has been such a pleasure having you on this platform. Thank you so much for making the time to be on the platform. And any last word to the audience who are watching this conversation?
Well, first, thank you very much, and to your viewers for the patience of listening to me. Look, I say the last word would be South Africa. We seem to be experiencing problems from time to time, which is natural. People forget that these changes sometimes don't come overnight. You still have great democracies like your America and in the UK, which are filled with problems even still. And so our young democracy would also face its own ups and downs. But I have confidence in the people of South Africa. They're resilient. They've seen it before. They know what they want, and they will always push and fight for what is right, what is fair, what is just, and for the change of the conditions that they are faced with. We just need to keep rallying, because indeed, South Africa has great potential. And as South Africans, we can all come together to make it great.
And that was Kingsley Mamabolo, a distinguished diplomat, joining me exclusively here on Kumza Africa Amplified as we talk about his incredible journey. I hope you have enjoyed that conversation. If you like the content of this podcast, remember to subscribe, like, and share. Until next time, it is goodbye for now. Cheers.